The night they divided us like furniture, Mom said, "I'll take Emmy," and Dad said, "I'll take Noah." My name just drifted into the silence, an item for the lawyers to handle later. 16 years passed. They returned, not for an apology, but for my signature on a loan document. They didn't know the girl they left for the state now runs an art fund, and that tonight, I am finally ready to say no. My name is Alina Price. I was 14, and I was sitting on the warped wooden floor of the upstairs hallway in our house in Ashbridge, trying to make a fox. The clay was cheap, a grayish block from the craft store that never seemed to get soft, only sticky. It smelled like damp earth and chemicals. I was trying to work the moisture back into it, pinching the snout into something sharp and intelligent, but it kept slumping. I was 14, and I was focusing on the fox as if it were the only thing in the world that mattered, because downstairs, the world was ending. Their voices weren't muffled anymore. They had stopped shouting an hour ago and had moved on to the calm, terrifying phase of division. It was the sound of a patient dying, the flatline tone of finality. "Emmy goes with me." It was my mother's voice, sharp, decisive, the same voice she used on her EMT shifts. Emmy was 9. Emmy was easy. A pause, the scrape of a chair on the kitchen tile. "Fine," my father said. His voice was rougher, coated in the sawdust of his day. "Noah stays with me." Noah was 16. Noah was already half a man, already useful in my father's carpentry workshop. I held my breath, waiting. My hands stopped moving on the clay. I waited for my name, Alina. I waited for one of them to say, "Alina." The silence stretched, pulling thin. It was broken only by the sound of the early autumn rain hitting the window at the end of the hall. I could smell that rain, and beneath it, the smell of the old paint on the baseboards. I waited so long that the silence itself became the answer. I was the line item left blank. I was the "to be discussed later." I was the problem nobody wanted to solve. The realization hit my stomach like ice water. My fingers, slick with clay slip, spasmed. The little gray fox slipped from my grasp. It didn't shatter. The cheap clay was too dense for that. It hit the floorboards with a wet, heavy thud and split perfectly in two, right down the spine. I stared at the two halves, a clean break. My father was a seasonal carpenter. He smelled like pine resin and turpentine, and his hands were maps of calluses and small, silvery scars. He built things that were strong, things that were meant to last. He taught me how to use a level, how to find the stud in a wall. "Measure twice, cut once," he'd say, his voice warm with patience. My mother was an emergency medical technician. She worked nights and doubles, and she smelled like antiseptic soap and the stale coffee she drank from her thermos. She moved fast, her shoes always squeaking on the linoleum floors, a sound that meant she was home, that the house was safe. Our house was small, but it was obsessively tidy. Mom managed the chaos of life and death by controlling every inch of our living space. Dad built shelves and cabinets to contain everything. It was a house of order. That night, the order was gone. When I finally walked downstairs, hours later, the quiet was heavier than the shouting had been. The living room was different, all the framed photographs on the mantel, on the end tables, lining the hallway had been turned face down. The silver frames gleamed blankly under the lamp. The trip to the coast, the four of us squinting in the sun, Noah's first baseball game, Emmy's first grade picture, all of them erased, hidden. They were making the house sterile, turning it from a home into a property to be divided. They were making it easier to leave. I bent down and picked up the two halves of the broken fox. The clay was already starting to get cold, the edges hardening. It felt heavy in my palm. I slid the pieces into the deep pocket of my hoodie. The cold, damp clay pressing against my side felt like a stamp, a quiet authentication of what had just happened. I was broken, and this was the proof. The Lakeview Juvenile Court was not a place for children. It was a place for files and consequences. The room smelled like industrial floor polish and old paper, a dry, dusty smell that got in your throat. The benches were dark wood, polished to a high gloss by years of nervous hands and shifting bodies. They reflected the long, buzzing fluorescent lights overhead, making the whole room look jaundiced and sick. I sat on one of those benches, my feet not quite touching the floor. My mother sat 3 rows ahead of me. To the left, my father sat 2 rows behind me. To the right, they had lawyers. I had a woman I'd met that morning, a caseworker from North River Family Services. The loudest sound in the room was the clock. It was a big round clock with black numbers, and its second hand didn't sweep. It clicked, a heavy judgmental talk. Talk, talk. It sounded like a gavel falling, again and again, slicing up the minutes. The judge, a woman with hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, read from a stack of papers. Her voice was a monotone. "Reviewing the report from North River Family Services," she said, not looking at me. "Case number 749B. It states here, no party has articulated a specific care plan for the minor, Alina Price. It appears the distribution of the other children was informal." The minor, Alina Price. I felt myself shrink. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a sister. I was the minor, the leftover. The judge finally looked up, her glasses resting on the end of her nose. Her eyes were tired. "Miss Price, Alina, is there anything you would like to say to the court?" The lawyers stopped shuffling their papers. My mother froze, her gaze fixed on the scuff mark on her left shoe. My father pulled his phone from his pocket and looked at the screen, as if a very important message had just arrived. My throat was dry. I could feel the cold lump of clay in my pocket. I swallowed, and my voice came out small, barely a whisper. "I just want to be where someone actually wants me." The words hung in the air for one of talks from the clock. Then the room replied with procedure. The judge nodded, as if I had merely confirmed a fact. She looked back down at her papers. "Thank you, Alina." The lawyer started whispering again. My mother's shoulders slumped. My father put his phone away. My one sentence hadn't changed anything. It was just a formality. Another box checked on a form. The decision was fast. In the absence of a viable plan from either parent, and pending further evaluation, the judge said, temporary custody of Alina Price is granted to the state. She will be placed in a receiving home with North River Family Services, effective immediately, Maple Row. Maple Row. It sounded like a street on a board game. The judge banged her gavel. It was a small, quiet sound. Nothing like the clock, the caseworker, the woman I'd just met. Put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Okay, Alina, it's time to go." I stood up. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. I looked at my mother. She was still staring at her shoes, refusing to look up. I looked at my father. He was standing, putting his wallet back in his pocket, already turning to leave through a side door with his lawyer. He was already gone. I followed the caseworker out of the courtroom, down a different hallway, and into an elevator that smelled like burnt coffee. We walked out into the damp, gray afternoon. The car was a standard-issue sedan, beige and anonymous. I climbed into the back seat. The upholstery was scratchy. The social worker started the car, the radio playing softly a commercial for car insurance. I put my hand in my hoodie pocket. The clay felt cold and hard. I pulled it out. It was only one half, the back half of the fox, its tail and hind legs, the front half. The one with the face and the snout I had tried so hard to fix was gone. It must have fallen out in the courtroom. I stared at the broken piece in my hand. The other half was back there, on the floor of that yellow room, left under the glossy bench. It would be swept up by the janitor, thrown away with the dust and the paper wrappers. The car pulled away from the curb. I watched the courthouse disappear, clutching the one broken piece of clay so tightly my knuckles turned white. The Holloway house on Maple Row was not a home. It was a system. It was the cleanest place I'd ever been, cleaner than a hospital. Mrs. Holloway, a thin woman with hair pulled back so tightly it strained the skin at her temples, greeted me with a clipboard and a smile that was a perfect flat line. "Welcome, Alina," she said, her voice as starched as her apron. We believe structure is the key to stability. You'll find we run a tight ship. The ship was immaculate. The linoleum floors in the kitchen gleamed under fluorescent lights. The air smelled of ammonia and industrial-strength dryer sheets. The centerpiece of the house was not a fireplace or a family portrait. It was a massive, wall-mounted whiteboard in the kitchen, gridded out with black electrical tape. "This is the schedule," she said, tapping the board with a red dry erase marker. "We find it helps everyone stay on track." The schedule was dense. Wake up at 6 a.m., showers were 7 minutes, allocated by time slot, breakfast at 6:40, silent study from 7 to 8, school. Return. Chores at 4:30. Dinner was at 6:15 precisely. During dinner, there was no talking. Mr. Holloway, a large, silent man who seemed to be made entirely of beige clothing, liked to listen to the evening news report. Lights out at 9 p.m. There were other rules, unwritten ones. No food was allowed outside the kitchen, and the one that made my throat tighten. "We don't lock doors in this house. Alina, we believe in transparency and trust." It wasn't trust. It was surveillance. The Holloways had 2 biological children, a boy and a girl, both older than me. They lived on the ground floor. Their doors were closed. Through the wood, I could hear music, the rumble of a video game. My room was the attic. It had been converted. Poorly. The ceiling slanted down so sharply on one side that you couldn't stand up straight. I shared it with 2 other girls, both from North River. One was a chronic nail-biter named Sarah, and the other was a small, pale girl named Chloe who wet the bed. We had 3 metal cots lined up against the one straight wall. We each had one dresser. My dresser had 3 drawers. The bottom one was stuck, the wood warped by damp. The top one was occupied by clothes left behind by a girl who had already left. I was given the middle drawer. It was perhaps 4 inches deep. I took the small duffel bag North River had given me containing 3 t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a sweatshirt, and underwear, and I learned to fold. I folded my shirts into tight, precise squares, rolling my socks into dense little knobs. I flattened my clothes until they were as thin and compressed as paper. It was my first lesson in how to take up less space. I was learning origami, but with my life, the most important rule in the attic was not on the whiteboard downstairs. It was enforced by the silence. Lights went out at exactly 9 o'clock. And after 9, you did not cry. The first night, Chloe whimpered in her sleep. Sarah, from the cot next to me, hissed into the darkness, "Shut up, you'll wake them." The fear was absolute. Waking them was the ultimate crime. We were 3 mice living in the walls of a pristine laboratory, and our only job was to not disturb the experiment. The Holloways were not evil. They were not cruel. Mr. Holloway never raised his voice. Mrs. Holloway never missed a mealtime, and our clothes were always returned, stiff and bleached, exactly 48 hours after we put them in the hamper. But there was no warmth. There was only compliance. It was the feeling of cold metal in winter. If you touched it, it didn't hurt you, but it sucked all the heat out of your skin, leaving you numb. We were not children. We were tasks on their schedule. My new school was Maple Row High. I was enrolled as a temporary student. They gave me an ID card printed on bright yellow cardstock. My name spelled ALINA-PRICE. It made me look like a piece of hazardous equipment. My schedule was printed on a matching yellow slip of paper. English, algebra, world history, gym, and last period, art. Lunch was a structured failure. The cafeteria was a roaring ocean of noise and established social islands. I took my tray a square of pale pizza, a plastic cup of wilting carrots, a carton of milk, and found an empty seat at the far end of a table by the windows. I sat alone, my back to the room, and watched the football team practice on the field outside. They shouted and ran plays under a gray sky. I ate my pizza methodically, crust and all, just to make the time pass. I was invisible, a ghost in a borrowed sweatshirt. The silence I was forced into needed an outlet. My hands needed to work. The broken clay fox was still in my pocket, but it was just a hard, useless lump of gray rock now. I needed something else. I started taking the long way back to the Holloway's house from the bus stop. 2 blocks over, a family was moving out. Their driveway was piled high with junk for the trash collectors. Among the discarded lamps and mildewed boxes was a stack of old picture frames. Someone had smashed them. The glass was shattered, littering the concrete. My heart quickened. I glanced around. The street was empty. I knelt, pretending to tie my shoe, and my fingers closed around a piece of glass. It was sharp, triangular, and the color of a pale blue sky. I slipped it into my pocket. It felt like stealing, but it was just trash. I took another, a shard of dark green from what might have been a beer bottle. The next day, I went back. The pile was still there. I collected more. Clear glass, a piece of old, wavy mirror that reflected the world in curves, a sliver of amber. I hid them in my sock, inside my shoe, until I got back to the house. Behind the Holloway's detached garage, there was a recycling bin. I fished out a large, flat piece of cardboard from a shipping box. That night, I waited. The digital clock on the dresser clicked to 9:01. The lights in the house went out. The breathing of the other girls in the attic room slowed. I pulled the cardboard from under my cot. I arranged the glass shards, the pieces of trash. The shape emerged instantly. The sharp snout, the listening ear, the coiled tail. It was the fox. I had no glue. For now, I just arranged the pieces, memorizing their pattern. I was building a new fox, this time out of things that had been broken and thrown away. I started sketching it in the back of my algebra notebook, planning the mosaic, the lines of grout. I kept the notebook tucked under my pillow, the only private space I had. One afternoon, I came back from school. The house was supposed to be empty. Mrs. Holloway was at the grocery store, and Mr. Holloway was at work. But I heard a sound from the attic. I walked up the narrow stairs slowly. The attic door was ajar. Justin, the Holloway's son, was in our room. He was 16, with the same pale, dismissive eyes as his mother. He was holding my algebra notebook, my notebook. I stopped breathing. He was standing by my cot, flipping through the pages, past the equations, to the sketches in the back. "This yours?" he asked. His voice was bored. He wasn't asking permission. He was asserting ownership of the space. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. My hands clenched. He flipped another page, landing on a drawing I'd made of the fox. "Weird," he muttered. He looked up at me, a half smile, a sneer. "You're the quiet one, right?" He took a step toward me. "You wear a mask every day, don't you?" It was an accusation. He was poking me, the way you'd poke an animal in a cage to see if it was alive. I just stared at my notebook in his hand. I wanted to snatch it back, but I was frozen. I was in his house. I was the guest, the charity case, the temporary problem. He let out a short, sharp laugh, like a bark. "Whatever." He tossed the notebook onto my cot. It didn't land flat. It hit the metal frame and fell to the floor, the pages bending. He pushed past me in the narrow doorway, his shoulder brushing mine, and clattered down the stairs. I waited until I heard the front door slam. I picked up the notebook. He hadn't just dropped it. The page with the fox sketch was torn at the spiral, and the paper itself was crumpled, creased by his fist. A small, mean, unnecessary act of vandalism. He had marked his territory. 2 days later, the administrative rhythm kicked in. Mrs. Holloway caught me as I was putting my dinner plate in the dishwasher. "Alina," she said, her voice neutral. She was wiping a counter that was already spotless. "We received an email from North River today." I stood still, my hands wet. "It seems," she continued, focusing on a non-existent spot, "that this isn't a good placement. The report from the school, and our own observations, suggest you are having difficulty integrating with the family." Difficulty integrating. I thought of Justin's sneer, of the crumpled paper. I thought of the silent dinners, the 9 p.m. darkness. "It's no one's fault," she said, a generic, rehearsed line. "It's just not a good fit. They're going to find a different environment for you. The decision was already made. The email was sent. The file was updated. The mechanism of the system was moving. It was as fast and impersonal as a stapler punching through paper. Chunk, done. The beige sedan returned the next afternoon. It was a different driver this time, a woman. She introduced herself as Alana Reyes, my new caseworker. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail and eyes that were sharp and observant. She didn't smile, but she didn't look mean. She just looked busy. She watched me carry my single duffel bag to the car. She didn't offer to help, but she held the trunk open. We got in. She buckled her seatbelt and checked her mirrors. She didn't try to explain the Holloways or apologize for what happened. "So," she said, pulling away from the curb, "that wasn't the right place." It wasn't a question. I just nodded, watching the surgically clean house disappear. "That happens," Alana said, her voice clipped and professional. "It's a mismatch. Not your fault. We just find another spot." Her tone was so devoid of pity, so logistical, that it shocked me. She wasn't treating me like a broken bird. She was treating me like a piece of misfiled paperwork, and paperwork could be fixed. For the first time, I felt a tiny, strange flicker of hope. My backpack was on my lap. Inside it, wrapped in a t-shirt, was the piece of cardboard. I had found a small bottle of Elmer's glue in the attic and had started to attach the glass. The fox was half-formed, its edges sharp. As we turned onto the main road, the car hit a bump. One of the green shards of glass, the one I'd chosen for the fox's eye, pierced through the cardboard and the backpack fabric. It dug sharply into my leg. I flinched, shifting in my seat. I reached into the bag and my finger brushed the edge. It sliced my skin. A thin paper-cut sting. I pulled my hand out and looked at the thin, bright line of red on my fingertip. I didn't bleed much. The glass hadn't shattered. It was held in place. I had learned how to set the broken pieces so they wouldn't fall apart. When I had been packing, Chloe, the small pale girl, had watched me from her cot, her eyes wide with the familiar terror of being left behind. "Where are you going?" she had whispered. "A new place," I whispered back. "I'll send you a drawing," I told her, zipping my bag. "A picture of a fox." It was a lie. I knew it as I said it. I didn't know her last name, and I didn't know where I was going, but the lie felt necessary. It was a small, thin thread cast back into the darkness. It was a promise that we were real, that we existed outside of the whiteboards and the 9 p. Silence. Alana Reyes's beige sedan pulled onto a street called Harbor Falls. The house was at the end of the road, a wide, faded blue building that looked like it had been added onto over the years without a plan. The porch was a collection of mismatched rocking chairs and at least a dozen pairs of muddy boots in all sizes. The air smelled different here. It wasn't the chemical sterility of Maple Row. It smelled like damp pine needles and, faintly, from an open kitchen window, cinnamon and baked fruit. This was the Dunbar house. It was the exact opposite of the Holloway house, where the Holloways had silent, polished surfaces. The Dunbars had noise and clutter. It was a group home, but it didn't feel like an institution. It felt like a bus station. Mrs. Dunbar, a round, smiling woman who was always wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron, seemed to be in constant motion. The kitchen was the center of the universe. It always smelled like banana bread. My room was on the second floor, a long room with 3 sets of bunk beds, 6 beds, all filled. The walls, however, weren't beige or gray. The hallway leading to the room was a chaotic explosion of art. It was covered, floor to ceiling, in drawings, paintings, and lopsided clay pots. It was messy and vibrant. It wasn't the curated silence of a gallery. It was the joyful noise of a community center. 3 days after I arrived, I was trying to do algebra at the massive, scarred kitchen table, while 2 younger boys argued over a video game. The back door opened, and a woman I didn't recognize walked in without knocking, carrying a 5-gallon bucket. "Who wants to break stuff?" she shouted. The boys instantly stopped arguing and cheered. Mrs. Dunbar, without looking up from the pie crust she was rolling out, just pointed to the coffee pot. "Help yourself, Lainey." This was Lainey Monroe. She was a neighbor, and she was a potter and an instructor at a place called the Iron Bridge Arts Collective. Every other Saturday, she came to the Dunbar house with a bucket of discarded tiles and taught mosaics. We gathered at the big, splintered picnic table in the backyard. She dumped the bucket, and a cascade of broken plates, shimmering tiles, and sea-smoothed glass spilled out. "The rules are simple," she said, passing out safety goggles that were scratched from use. "We make beautiful things out of broken things, and you don't use a color you don't love." I watched for a long time. The other kids grabbed pieces with greedy delight. I just watched Lainey, how her hands moved, how she saw a shard of a blue coffee mug and said, "Oh, that's the perfect sky." Finally, I went upstairs. I came back down holding my piece of cardboard, the glass fox. It was ugly. The glue was patchy, and the edges were dangerously sharp. I had wrapped it in a t-shirt to carry it. I held it out to her, my stomach twisting. I expected her to laugh, or worse, to give me the sad, pitying look of a caseworker. Lainey stopped talking. She took the cardboard from me, her hands gentle. She didn't flinch at the sharp edges. She ran a calloused finger just above the glass, tracing the shape. She saw the green glass eye. She saw the broken mirror I'd used for the tail. She looked up at me, and her eyes weren't full of pity. They were full of professional respect. "Well," she said, her voice quiet but carrying over the sound of the kids tapping tiles. "You take things people throw away and make them into things no one would dare throw away." She touched the edge of the blue glass shard I'd found on the street. "But we need to fix this," she said, her voice turning practical. "You're going to cut yourself to pieces, kid. These edges are raw. Let's teach you how to handle them." Lainey taught me patience. She taught me the language of materials. The next Saturday, she got permission from Mrs. Dunbar and took me to the Iron Bridge Arts Collective. It was a huge, converted warehouse by the river, and it smelled like damp earth, hot metal, and oil paint. She led me to a machine in the corner. "The grinder," she said, flipping a switch. The machine roared to life with a high-pitched scream. It vibrated in my teeth. I was terrified of it. She took my hand, steady and firm, and guided it, showing me how to press the edge of the glass against the spinning, diamond-dusted wheel. Water sprayed up. The sharp edge didn't shatter. It turned smooth, opaque, and safe. It became tame. She taught me how to mix adhesive, the tacky pull of it, the chemical smell. She taught me how to mix grout, the gray powder turning into heavy, wet concrete. "Slow," she'd say, her hands next to mine. "Don't rush the grout. You rush. You get air bubbles. It'll crack later. You have to push it into every single crack. You have to fill the spaces." I learned to spread it, to push it into every tiny gap, to fill the void, and then, the magic part wiping the excess away, the gritty haze disappearing to reveal the clean, shining colors underneath. It was meticulous, frustrating, and perfect. It was the first thing that had made sense to me in months. It was a skill that felt like breathing. Alana Reyes, my caseworker, came for my monthly check-in. This time, we didn't sit in her car. Mrs. Dunbar had insisted she come in for a slice of banana bread. We sat on the crowded porch. I brought my new fox. This one was on a solid piece of plywood, not flimsy cardboard. The edges were ground. The grout was a deep charcoal gray. It was heavy and solid. Alana held it. She turned it over in her hands, testing its weight. She was a woman of systems and files, but she understood work. She understood evidence. "This is good," she said. She looked at me. "This is structured. You're stable here." She took a bite of bread. "There's a weekend program," she said, brushing crumbs off her clipboard. "The North River Young Artists Program. It's funded. I'm signing you up. You'll go to Iron Bridge. You already know the place." The collective was different on my own. It wasn't just Lainey's quiet corner. It was a working studio, full of adults who were busy and focused, and there was Theo Monroe, Lainey's husband. He was the logistics manager. He was the one who made the place run, who fixed the kilns and ordered the 50-pound bags of clay. He was the opposite of Lainey's warm, chaotic energy. Theo was tall and broad, and he never seemed to talk. He wore a heavy canvas apron stained with a dozen different chemicals. He found me standing awkwardly by the door on my first Saturday, clutching my backpack. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask about my file. He just looked at my thin hoodie. "You'll be cold in here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And you're grinding glass. You need proper gloves. Those little ones won't do." He disappeared into a supply closet and came back with a pair of thick leather work gloves and a heavy canvas apron, just like his. He handed them to me. "These are yours now. Don't lose them." That was it. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask about my feelings. He saw a problem. I was cold and unprotected, and he gave me the tools to fix it. It felt like the first real respect I had ever been shown. I found a corner of the studio that became mine. I had access to a mountain of scraps, and I started to work. The first fox was an accident. The second was a defense. The ones I made at Ironbridge were different. I started a series. I called it Foxes That Don't Run. They weren't hiding. They weren't curled up in sleep. I made them standing, their heads turned, looking straight out at the viewer. They were defiant. They were here, and they were made of the sharpest, most discarded pieces I could find: shattered taillight glass, broken mirror, chips of old porcelain, and I ground every edge until it was safe to touch. I'd come back to the Dunbar house late on Saturdays, exhausted, my clothes covered in dust, my hands smelling of grout. I was in the shared bathroom, one of 3 girls jostling for sink space, trying to get the gray paste out from under my fingernails. I looked in the mirror. My hair was a mess. My face was smudged with dust, and I was happy. I smiled, a real, wide smile, and I saw it. There was a smudge of gray grout on my front tooth. It looked like a piece of armor. It looked like a secret symbol, a mark of belonging to the tribe of people who made things instead of breaking them. I felt a small, strange laugh bubble up. I didn't wipe it away immediately. Nobody at the Dunbar house asked about Court. They didn't ask about my parents, or Noah, or Emmy. They didn't tiptoe around my past, afraid of what they might unleash. They only cared about the present. Mrs. Dunbar would see me packing my bag for the studio on a Saturday morning and just say, "Alina, honey, do you need more glue or more time?" It was the most beautiful question anyone had ever asked me. It meant they trusted me. It meant my needs were practical, not pathological. The system, however, was always moving. It was a Tuesday, not my scheduled day. Alana Reyes's beige sedan pulled up. She found me on the porch. She wasn't holding her clipboard. "Alina," she said, "your work at Ironbridge is excellent. Your grades at Harbor Falls High are stable. You're doing well here." I braced myself. That was the language of change. "A pre-adoptive family has reviewed your file," she said, her voice flat and professional. "They're interested in meeting you." My stomach went cold. The grinder, the smell of banana bread, the heavy apron, Lainey, Theo, it was all temporary. I was still temporary. "Okay," I managed to say. "When?" "Soon," she said. "I'll be in touch." She left. I went upstairs to my bunk. I sat on the edge of the thin mattress. I reached into the deep pocket of my hoodie, the one I'd worn that day in court. My fingers closed around the small, hard lump I'd kept hidden for months. It was the back half of the original clay fox. The piece I had saved, the other half, the one with the face, was long gone, swept away with the dust on the courtroom floor. I held the cold, gray piece in my palm. It was just a lump of dry, broken clay. It was the girl in the hallway. It was the past. The girl who made this was broken. The girl who made the new foxes. The ones that stared back. She was different. I closed my hand around the clay. This small, broken piece would have to learn to stand on its own. The drive to the pre-adoptive placement was quiet. Alana Reyes seemed to understand that this was different. This wasn't just a transfer. This was an audition. My audition. The house wasn't in a neighborhood. We drove for 20 minutes outside Harbor Falls, down a long gravel road that wound through dense pine trees. The road ended at the North Fork River, and there, set back from the bank, was a house made of whole logs. It wasn't a cabin. It was a solid, 2-story house that looked like it had grown out of the earth. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. Lainey was on the porch, but this wasn't the boisterous, chaotic Lainey from the Dunbar house. She was quiet, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jeans. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes were— Theo came out, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded at Alana, then looked at me and my single duffel bag. "Welcome, Alina," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We've been waiting for you." That night was the first test, dinner. My stomach was so tight I was afraid I couldn't eat. I was used to the silent, sterile dinners at the Holloways and the loud, chaotic free-for-all at the Dunbars. This was something else. We sat at a heavy wooden table. The house was quiet, filled only with the sound of the river outside and the sizzle of the barbecue Theo was tending on the deck. We ate grilled chicken and corn on the cob. The silence felt heavy, but not angry. Lainey finally broke it, but her question wasn't what I expected. She didn't ask about school, or my file, or if I was settling in. "So, Alina," she said, passing me a bowl of salad. "I've seen what you can do with broken things, but what do you like to make?" I stared at her. It was such a simple, open-ended question. It wasn't about my past. It was about my preference. "Glass," I said, my voice small. "I like the glass." "Good," Theo said from the grill. "Glass is honest. It doesn't pretend to be soft." After dinner, Lainey looked at me. "Come on, let me show you the real reason we bought this place." She led me down a set of stairs to a basement that wasn't a basement at all. It was a full walkout studio built into the slope of the hill, with a wall of windows facing the river. It was enormous. It had a pottery wheel in one corner, a massive kiln in another, and a long, scarred workbench running the length of the windows. It smelled like clay and wet stone, and the faintest trace of Theo's metal oil. "This is it," Lainey said, flipping on a string of bright overhead lights. "This studio is ours. It's where we work." She walked me to the workbench. On one end was her pottery setup, tools caked in dried clay. On the other, a clean, empty space. "This part," she said, tapping the empty bench, "is yours." She pointed to a set of heavy wooden shelves on the wall. "And that's your shelf, for your supplies, for your work, whatever you want." My own shelf. It was more than the single, 4-inch drawer at the Holloways. It was a promise of permanence. It was space. Theo came down the stairs behind us, holding something in his hand. He walked over to a tall metal cabinet in the corner. "You'll need a place for your tools," he said. "The good ones. The ones you don't want anyone else touching." He opened the cabinet. It was full of grinders, soldering irons, and heavy-duty cutters. He pointed to the top drawer. "This one's empty." He closed the drawer, and it clicked. He held out his hand. In his palm was a small brass key. "This is the key to your tool cabinet," he said, dropping it into my hand. The metal was heavy and cool. "You're an artist. You're allowed to make a mess like a real artist. You're also allowed to lock up your stuff. Your choice." I closed my hand around the key. A key, not to a house, not to a room, but to my work. It was the first key I had been given since my parents had locked their own doors against each other. "Go on," he said, nodding toward the bench. "It's yours." That weekend, we had the family call. My stomach twisted again. I expected it to be an interrogation, but the laptop screen flickered to life, and a young man with Lainey's eyes and a terrible mustache appeared. "This is Gabe," Lainey said, laughing. "Our son. He's at college, pretending to study engineering." Gabe leaned into the camera. "Hey," he said to me. His voice was staticky. So you're the artist? That's cool. I just spent 4 hours trying to get a 3D printer to recognize a line of code. He squinted at me. If you ever need anyone to troubleshoot a 3D printer, definitely call someone else. I'm useless. It was a terrible, awkward joke, and it was the most normal thing I had ever heard. He wasn't treating me like a case file. He was treating me like an annoying new sibling. It was perfect. The system still had its tendrils. Alana Reyes was required to do her monthly check-ins, especially during the pre-adoptive period. When her beige sedan pulled up the first time, I felt the old panic rise. The clipboard was coming. The questions were coming. The evaluation. Lainey saw me stiffen. "Tea," she said, heading to the kitchen. When Alana knocked, Lainey opened the door and pulled her into a hug. "Alana, you look exhausted. Sit down. I'm making tea. Alina and I were just about to head to the studio. You should come see what she's working on." She didn't treat Alana like a threat. She didn't try to hide me or manage the conversation. She just invited the clipboard in for tea. She brought Alana down to the studio. Pulling up a third stool, Alana sat, her clipboard in her lap, and we just talked about the light, about the river, about the new grinder head Theo had bought. Lainey wasn't afraid of the system. She didn't see Alana as the enemy. She saw her as a part of the process, and by including her, by making her tea. Lainey was showing me that she wasn't afraid, which meant I didn't have to be, either. The safety of the studio, the weight of the key in my pocket, it changed my work. I started a new Fox. Fox 7. This one was different. I had a piece of dark, almost black, mirrored glass that I wanted to use for the body. But it was in 2 separate pieces. The old me, the girl at the Dunbars, would have hidden the break, surrounded it with other colors to disguise the fact that it was ever 2 things. But I thought of Theo's words. Glass is honest. I ground the edges of the 2 black pieces until they were smooth and safe. I laid them on the board, leaving a thin, deliberate gap between them. A clean break. Then I went to Theo's metal shop. I found a thin strip of copper, bright and warm. I cut the copper to size. I laid it in the gap between the 2 pieces of black glass. I grouted around it, carefully, so the copper strip remained bright. It was a spine. It wasn't a flaw. It wasn't a crack to be hidden with gray paste. It was a feature. I was intentionally showing the seam, the place where it had been broken. I was making the break the strongest part of the whole piece. But the outside world didn't just disappear because I had a key. The mail still came. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was in a thin, pale pink envelope. The return address was a name and an apartment in the city, neither of which I recognized. Elaine Connolly. I opened it. It was a single sheet of floral stationery, the kind you buy in a box of 50. It was a short, cheerful note. It said that she was happy, that she had gotten remarried to a wonderful man, and that they were building a new life. She hoped I was doing well. It was signed. Best wishes, Elaine Connolly. Not Mom, not even Elaine. A full, formal, stranger's name. It was a press release. A Christmas newsletter to a distant acquaintance. It was a severing. I read it 3 times, looking for a single word of apology, of longing, of Alina. It wasn't there. She had a new name. She was a new person, and I was not part of her new life. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. Lainey answered, then held it out to me. Her expression neutral. "It's your father, Alina." I took the phone, my hand shaking. I hadn't heard his voice in almost a year. "Alina, hey, kiddo." His voice was so familiar, so warm and rough, that it physically hurt. It was the voice that taught me how to use a level. "How are you? They treating you right?" "I'm okay, Dad." "Good, good. Listen, I'm calling with good news. Big news. Really." He paused, and I could hear him smile. "I'm getting married again. Her name is Sarah, and she's wonderful. Just wonderful. She has 2 kids, little ones." I waited. "And, you know," he continued, his voice shifting, becoming even warmer, more persuasive. "We're building a new family. It's a fresh start. And her kids are little. You know, they need a lot. They need a full-time dad. You understand, right? Alina, you're older. You're strong. You get it. You understand. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. He was telling me to understand. He was telling me that I was the strong one, which meant I was the one who could be left behind. His words were warm, but the message was empty. He was gone. They were both gone. I didn't cry. I felt cold. I finished the call, said, "Congratulations, Dad," and hung up. I didn't tell Lainey or Theo about the content of the letter or the call, but that night, as I was washing my grout brushes in the studio sink, Lainey came in. She didn't say anything, just started wiping down the counter next to me. "Lainey," I said, my voice quiet, "when Alana comes, with her file, what does it call me?" Lainey stopped wiping. "What do you mean, honey?" "In the court," I said, staring into the gray water. "And in the files, at Maple Row, they called me the surplus, the minor without a plan, the leftover." I looked up at her. "I don't want to be that anymore. I'm not the extra one." Lainey's eyes were fierce. She dried her hands. "No," she said. "You are not. You are Alina, and I will make sure that is the only name on that file." Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The house was dark. I walked out onto the deck. The river was a loud, rushing sound in the blackness. Theo was there, sitting in one of the wooden chairs, just listening. He didn't seem surprised to see me. I stood by the railing. He didn't say anything for a long time. "It's a lot of pressure, isn't it?" he said. His voice a low rumble in the dark. I just nodded, my throat tight. "This," he said, gesturing to the house, the studio, the river, the dinners, the check-ins, all of it. It feels like a test you have to pass, every day. I could finally breathe. He saw it. "I just want you to know one thing, Alina," he said, turning his head to look at me in the faint starlight. "You don't have to earn your place here. You're not here on probation. This isn't a job. You don't have to prove you're worth keeping." He paused, letting the river fill the silence. "You just have to be. That's it. Just be. We already want you." I stood there, gripping the cold, damp railing. I didn't say thank you. I didn't have to. I just stayed. And we listened to the river together. I was 15 when I walked into the art room at Harbor Falls High. It felt less like a new school and more like an extension of the studio. The teacher, Mr. Kinsey, knew Lainey and Theo. He had already seen my work at Ironbridge. "Alina," he said, not even looking up from the kiln he was loading. "There's a spot on the advanced arts team. We're prepping for the fall showcase. You're in." It was that simple. I wasn't a file. I wasn't a transfer. I was a pair of hands. The next week, I walked into the art room, and the poster for the showcase was tacked to the main bulletin board, right by the door. It was a big, brightly colored sheet, listing all the students involved. My eyes scanned the list, and there it was, featuring new work by Alania Price. Alania, the old, cold feeling of the courthouse, the chill of the Holloway attic, flooded my stomach. Alinia, an extra I, a simple, careless mistake that felt like an erasure. I was the girl without a clear name, the one who could be misspelled because she didn't really matter. I was the leftover. I stood there for a full minute. The old me would have shrunk. The old me would have walked away, accepting the misspelling as a fact. The old me would have been invisible. But I wasn't the old me. I was in Theo's heavy canvas apron. I had grout under my fingernails. I looked at the poster again. It was just a typo. A dumb, simple typo. It wasn't a judgment. It wasn't a verdict. Mr. Kinsey was in the supply closet. I looked at the desk, at the clutter of pens and brushes. I picked up a silver Sharpie. I walked to the poster. I didn't cross out the name. I didn't scribble over it. I simply drew a single, clean, silver line through the extra I. Then, next to it, I signed my name again, clear and bold. Alina. I put the cap back on the pen and went to my station. It was just a note that needed correcting. A quiet laugh, a short puff of air, escaped my chest. It felt like a small, important victory. That afternoon in the studio by the river, I was struggling. I was working on a new piece, and I was frustrated. I was still using the Fox 7 design, the one with the copper spine, but the copper looked too bright against the dull gray grout. The break was honest, but it was ugly. "It's just a scar," I told Lainey, throwing my rag down. Lainey looked at it for a long time, her head tilted. "You're treating it like a scar," she said. "You're trying to fill the break. Alina, you're trying to make it disappear. What if you illuminated it instead?" I didn't understand. She walked to one of Theo's cabinets, the one he kept locked, the one with the expensive, strange-smelling supplies. She came back with 2 small plastic bottles of clear, thick liquid and a tiny glass jar. The jar was full of a fine, shimmering gold powder. "This is 2-part epoxy resin," she said, setting the bottles down. "It cures clear as glass, but stronger than stone. And this," she said, tapping the jar, "is mica powder, pure gold pigment." She smiled. "There's an old Japanese art form called kintsugi. When a beautiful piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw it away. They repair it, but they don't use clear glue to hide the cracks. They use lacquer mixed with pure gold." She poured some of the resin and the hardener onto a paper plate, stirring it slowly. "They believe the piece is more valuable, more beautiful, because it was broken. They celebrate the break. It becomes the most important part of the story." She sprinkled in the gold powder. The clear, sticky resin swirled and transformed into liquid light. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Try it," she said. My hands were shaking. I took a thin wooden stick and dipped it in the golden resin. I carefully, slowly, drizzled it into the channel I had left for the copper spine. It settled, thick and bright, filling the gap perfectly. It wasn't a seam. It wasn't a repair. It was a vein of gold. When it cured, it was hard and smooth. It didn't just fill the crack. It lit it up from the inside. The break was no longer the weakest part of the piece. It was the strongest and the most beautiful. That gold resin changed everything. It became my language. The Iron Bridge Collective was offering a single summer scholarship for a high school student. It meant a full-time, paid residency, your own studio space, unlimited materials. It was a serious honor. The application required a formal proposal. I knew exactly what to write. I spent 3 days on it, writing and rewriting. My proposal is titled, "Things That Become Strong by Accepting the Break." It will be a series of mosaics that reject the idea of repair as a form of hiding, using discarded glass, shattered porcelain, and broken mirror. This series will explore how materials defined by their fragility are transformed. The fractures will not be hidden with grout. They will be celebrated. They will be filled with pigmented resin and veins of metal, turning the breaks themselves into the central, illuminated feature of the work. I got the scholarship. I spent that summer living and breathing in the studio. I came in with Theo at 7 in the morning and left with Lainey after dark. I made a new series. The culmination was one large piece. It was a fox, but only barely. It was mostly an abstract shape of shattering cobalt blue glass, the kind you find on old medicine bottles. And every single crack, every line where one piece met another, was a brilliant, shining line of gold. I called it permission. Permission to be broken, permission to be whole, permission to be both at the same time. In late August, Permission was entered in the Iron County Fair. It won first prize. I stood next to it, my hands sweaty, while the head judge, a thin, serious woman from a gallery in the city, read her notes aloud. "The artist shows a remarkable maturity of vision," she read, her voice echoing in the exhibition hall. "The piece is direct in its gaze, yet incredibly gentle in its execution. It confronts the viewer without aggression, asking us to see the beauty in the fracture. Direct yet gentle." I held those words in my chest. The system was moving in parallel. Alana Reyes came by the studio. But she wasn't there for a regular check-in. She was holding a photograph of permission stapled to her file. "This is," she said, tapping the photo, "pretty undeniable. Alina, the school reports are perfect. The residency was a success. You're stable." I waited. She finally put the clipboard down. "Lainey and Theo have filed the paperwork," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "The official petition for adoption." My heart didn't soar. It just stalled. It stopped. This was it, the final step, the thing I had wanted and been terrified of for so long. "We're scheduling the hearing," Alana said. "The date for the judge to sign off." She looked at her calendar. "The court only has one opening in the next few months. It's in mid-October, the 22nd. I stared at her. "October 22nd, I repeated, my voice hollow. That's the night of the Iron Bridge Fall showcase. The one with my poster. The adoption and the exhibit. The day my past would be legally erased, and the night my future as an artist would begin. They were happening at the exact same time." "It's fine," I said, a little too quickly. "We can do both. The hearing is in the afternoon. The showcase is at night. It's fine." The universe, feeling the ground shift, decided to send in the ghosts. That night, an email. It appeared in my inbox, and the name made my blood run cold. Elaine Connolly, my mother. My hand trembled as I clicked it. It was short. "Hi, Alina. I was just thinking of you. With Halloween coming up, I was remembering that silly costume you made. I'm going to be in Harbor Falls visiting a friend around then. Maybe we could finally get a coffee if you're free." I read it 10 times. "If you're free," I drafted a reply. "Yes, I would be okay with that. Let me know when." I didn't send it. I just looked at it. 2 days later, a follow-up email appeared. "On second thought, Alina, things are just too complicated with my new family. The kids are still adjusting. It's probably not a good time. Maybe after the new year." Click. The door, which had been open just a crack, was shut again. The invitation was revoked. A week later, a text from my father. "Hey kiddo, heard you're doing great in school. I'm so proud. Let's get together soon. Maybe after the summer break." I didn't reply. I knew the script. Summer came and went. In September, another text. "Things are crazy here. New job. Let's push it. After the holidays for sure." I put the phone down on the workbench. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was just done. I was done waiting by the phone. I was done clearing my schedule for maybe and later. I was done chasing promises that evaporated as soon as I got close. I made a new decision. I would not reply. I would not chase. I would just be silent. My energy belonged to the studio. It belonged to the hearing on the 22nd. It belonged to the showcase. I would not give any more of it to ghosts. Gabe came home from college for a surprise weekend. He walked into the studio and just stopped, staring at the new pieces, the gold seams glowing under the work lights. "Whoa," he said, touching the surface of permission. This is really something. Alina, it's different." He was carrying a heavy canvas bag. He pulled out an old, beautiful film camera, a Pentax, all metal and glass. "It was Dad's," he said. "It's all manual, but the lens is incredible. You should try shooting your work with it, properly." He spent an hour showing me how to load the film, how to set the aperture, how to find the focus. "Get in close," he said. "Focus on the details. That's where your story is." I spent the whole weekend with that camera. I didn't take pictures of the foxes. I took pictures of the cracks. I got so close that the viewfinder was filled with nothing but the jagged, sharp edge of broken blue glass meeting the smooth, perfect, golden line of the resin. I shot 2 full rolls of black and white film. When we got the prints back from the shop, I laid them out on the workbench, and I gasped. The black and white film had turned the blue glass and the gray grout into soft, muted, gentle shades. But the gold resin, it didn't turn gray, because it was metallic. It had reflected the light, even in black and white. It glowed. It was a brilliant, electric white. It looked brighter, more alive, than anything else in the photographs. It was a beautiful paradox. The black and white, which should have hidden the color, had only made the gold shine more. Lainey came and stood behind me. She was so quiet, I thought she was angry. Then I saw she was crying. Just one tear tracing a line through the clay dust on her cheek. "Alina," she whispered. That night, Lainey printed my photographs, the abstract close-ups of the cracks. She put them in simple, thin black frames, and she hung them on the main studio wall, right next to the mosaics themselves. I stood back and looked at them. The full piece, the fox, the blue glass, the whole story. And next to it, the abstract photograph, the close-up of the break, the celebration of the repair. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever seen my past and my present hanging side by side on the same wall. Not fighting, not trying to erase each other. They weren't in conflict. They were just art. They were just true. October 22nd was a clear, cold day. The sky was a sharp, pale blue. The hearing was at 2 p.m, which gave me the entire morning to be nervous. I couldn't be in the studio. My hands were shaking too much to hold glass. We drove to the Lakeview Juvenile Court, the same building I had been in 2 years earlier, the same smell of floor polish and old paper, the same heavy, dark wooden benches. But this time, I wasn't alone. Lainey was on my right, Theo on my left. They weren't sitting rows apart. We were a single unit. The courtroom was smaller this time, or maybe it just felt that way. The judge was different. This one was a man. Judge Whitaker. He looked less tired than the first judge, but his eyes were just as perceptive. Alana Reyes was there, sitting in the front row, her file on her lap, but she wasn't representing me. She was just a witness. We had our own lawyer, a quiet woman Lainey and Theo had hired, the other side of the room. The benches where my mother and father had sat separately was empty. Their absence was a physical presence in the room, a cold draft. The lawyer for North River stood up. "Your Honor, the biological parents, Elaine Connolly and Victor Price, have both submitted their voluntary, signed surrenders of parental rights. They have been filed with the court. They have waived their right to appear." Judge Whitaker looked at the empty benches. His expression didn't change, but he let the silence sit there for a beat, longer than was comfortable. He looked at the papers. "The surrenders are in order." He then looked at us, at me. He didn't smile, but his voice was kind. "So, Alina, this is the part of the proceeding where I ask you, for the record, what you want." He wasn't asking me to choose. He wasn't asking me to explain. He was just asking what I wanted. I thought of the first time I was in this building. I thought of the girl who whispered, "I just want to be where someone actually wants me." That girl was asking for a place. She was a piece of mail, hoping for an address. I wasn't that girl anymore. I looked at the judge. My voice didn't shake. "Your Honor," I said, "I want to be where people already chose me." It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. Judge Whitaker looked at Lainey and Theo. He looked at Alana Reyes. He looked back at me. A small, real smile touched his mouth. "A very wise answer." He picked up his pen. "In the matter of Alina Price, and with the voluntary surrender of rights from the biological parents, and with the strong recommendation of North River Family Services and the home study of record, this court finds it in the best and profound interest of the child to grant this petition for adoption." He signed the paper. The sound of the pen on the thick paper was loud. Scratch, scratch, sign. "Congratulations," he said, closing the file. "You are now, legally, a family." My lawyer touched my shoulder. Lainey let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since we walked in. Theo put his big, rough hand on my back. I had expected to feel something, a rush of joy, relief, crying. I felt hollow. It was done, but the climax had happened without me. My parents hadn't been there to fight, to object, or even to say goodbye. They had just signed a form. It felt like a delivery, like I was a package that had been rerouted, and the final signature was just proof of receipt. We stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, the same hallway I had walked down with the caseworker 2 years ago. Lainey must have seen the look on my face. She took my hand. Her hand was warm, calloused from the clay. "We didn't just sign a paper to forget what happened, Alina," she said, her voice low and fierce. "We signed it to begin. This isn't an ending, it's the starting line. What you do now, that's the story." We walked out into the cold, bright October air, and for the first time, I wasn't leaving a courthouse, I was just going home. A week later, I was in the studio, prepping for the showcase, which was now only days away. The tension of the court was gone, replaced by the humming energy of the work. Lainey was at the front desk of the collective when the local paper was delivered. "Alina," she yelled. Her voice was strange. "You need to see this." It was the Harbor Falls Ledger, the small local paper. They did a weekly human interest piece. This week, it was about the Iron Bridge Arts Collective and its upcoming showcase, and there, on the front page of the art section, was a photograph. It was one of the black and white photos Gabe had taken, a close-up of a new piece, focusing on a bright gold seam. But it wasn't the picture that made my heart stop. It was the caption underneath. "Work by local artist Alina Price, whose series on repaired materials will be featured in the Iron Bridge Fall Showcase. Alina Price, not Alania, not a foster youth, not a minor in the system. Local artist Alina Price, my name, my correct name, attached to my work, printed in black ink for the whole town to see. I was real. I was an artist. I was local. I belonged." The showcase itself was a blur of lights and people and warmth. My work was hung on the main wall, with the black and white photographs next to them, just as Lainey had planned. People stood in front of them, really looking. A tall, thin woman with striking silver hair stood in front of Permission for a long time. She wasn't just looking, she was studying. She walked over to me, her eyes bright. "You're Alina Price," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said. "I'm Professor Eva Andal," she said, handing me a card. "I teach materials science and sculpture at Pine Ridge College of Art. Your work with resin is extraordinary. You're not just filling, you're building with it. You're changing the structural integrity." I just stared at her. "Thank you," I managed. "Are you a senior?" she asked. "A junior." "Good," she said, tapping my arm with her card. "That gives me time. Pine Ridge runs a competitive creative camp for rising seniors. It's by invitation. I want you to come. I'm sending you the application. I expect to see it." She smiled, sharp and brilliant, and then she moved on to the next piece. I looked at the card. Pine Ridge College of Art, a place I had only seen in catalogs. A professor had invited me. Life was moving fast. The ground was solid under my feet, and the future was opening up, pulling me forward. And that's when the past sent its first, tentative echo. It was a text message, from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Alina?" "This is Noah, my brother." My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't spoken to him, hadn't seen him, since the day my father said, "Noah stays with me." "This is Alina." I typed back, my thumb shaking. My phone rang almost immediately. I hit accept and walked out the back door of the studio, into the cold night air. "Alina." His voice was deeper. He was 18 now. He wasn't a boy. "Noah, hi." "Hey," he said. There was a long, terrible silence. I could hear music in the background, a party or a dorm room. "So, I heard you got adopted." "Yeah," I said. "I did." "That's good," he said quickly. That's really good. I'm glad. Are they good people?" "They're the best people," I said. "Good." Another silence. "Listen, Al, Dad wants everything to just be quiet. You know, he wants his new life, and he doesn't like looking back. And Mom, she's just gone, I guess. But I don't know. I miss you. I just wanted to say I miss you. And I'm sorry." The words hit me. I miss you. I miss you too. Noah, I whispered. I saw a picture, he said. My friend's mom from Harbor Falls. She posted something about an art show. She sent it to me. Your stuff. The glass. It's awesome, Al. Thanks, I said, a tear finally sliding down my cold cheek. I gotta go, he said, but maybe I could see you. Sometime not now, but soon. Okay, I said. Soon. Okay, bye, Al. He hung up. I looked at my phone. The call had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I went back inside, my hands shaking for a different reason. I found one of the glossy postcards the collective had printed for the showcase. It had the picture of permission on the front. I flipped it over. I wrote his new address, the one from the caller ID, and in the message space, I wrote just 2 words, I'm okay. I put a stamp on it and put it in the outgoing mail slot. I had acknowledged him, I had told him the truth, and I had kept the boundary. The system was the last piece. Alana Reyes came to the house by the river one last time, but she wasn't carrying her clipboard. She was carrying a thin manila envelope. Well, she said, sitting at the kitchen table as Lainey poured her a cup of tea. That's it. Case 749B is officially closed. She slid the envelope across the table. This is your original birth certificate, and the final, signed adoption decree. They're yours, your history, and your future, all in one envelope. I took it. It felt thin, too thin to hold a life. Alana stood up to go. She paused at the door. Alina, she said, her voice dropping the professional, clipped tone. You did the work. I just filed the papers, but I want to give you something. She reached into her wallet and pulled out a personal business card. Not the one from North River. It just had her name and a private cell number. You're 16, she said. You're smart, and you're tough, but you've spent your whole life being told yes by a system that didn't know how to say no, and you're going to have people from your past, who are going to ask you for things, and you're going to feel obligated. She pushed the card into my hand. I'm giving you my personal number, she said. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you don't know how to say no, you call me, and I will say it for you, anytime. I looked at the card. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given me, the permission to refuse. Thank you, Alana. Go be an artist, she said, and she left. That night, in the studio, I finally did what I had been planning to do. I took out the one remaining piece of that first, broken clay fox, the back half, the piece that had fallen from my pocket in the courtroom. It was hard and gray and ugly. I took my grinder and I carefully, deliberately, broke the raw edge, making the break fresh and clean. Then, I mixed a small, precious batch of the gold resin. I held the broken piece in one hand. I took my smallest tool and I painted the gray edge with a thick, shining coat of pure gold. I didn't try to find the other half. I didn't try to make it whole. I just sealed the break. I celebrated the fracture. I let it cure under the light. When it was hard, I mounted the small, gray and gold piece in a simple, deep-set black frame. It wasn't a fox anymore. It was a relic, a testament. I stood in the studio, the signed adoption decree in its envelope on my workbench, and I looked at the small, framed piece of my own history. I had my name. I had my family. I had my work. I whispered it to the quiet, dark studio, to the sound of the river running outside. From now on, I get to decide. The invitation from Professor Andel was a key, but it unlocked a door to a much larger, louder, and more intimidating building. Pine Ridge College of Art, in the sprawling, rain-soaked city of Riverton, was nothing like the community-driven warmth of Iron Bridge. Iron Bridge was about finding a voice. Pine Ridge was about defending the voice you had. I moved into a tiny dorm room with cinder-block walls. Lainey and Theo drove me the 3 hours, their truck loaded with my mosaics, my tools, and 3 boxes of Theo's homemade granola. They were quiet during the drive, the silence filled with a new, proud tension. When they left, Lainey hugged me so hard, I felt a rib creak. "You call us?" she said. "Not if you need something. You just call." I chose sculpture and mixed media. I was Alina Price, freshman. File number erased. Future wide open. My classes were full of critiques where professors used words like liminal and praxis. I was terrified. But I was also home. My first critique. I put up Permission, a visiting artist, a man with thin glasses, squinted at it. "It's decorative," he said, the word landing like a slap. "The kintsugi metaphor is a bit on the nose, isn't it? The gold in the crack? It's been done." I felt the old heat rise, the Holloway chill, but then I looked at the gold seam. "It's not a metaphor," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "It's a structural component. The resin isn't just color, it's an epoxy that has a higher tensile strength than the original material. It's not a decoration of the break, it's a re-engineering. The break is the thesis." Professor Endall, standing in the back, just smiled. But college was expensive. My scholarship covered tuition. But materials were another world. Glass was cheap, but resin was not, and I was tired of working on flat boards. I had ideas. I wanted my pieces to stand on their own, to hang in the air, to have skeletons. I needed metal. I needed to learn to weld. I found a job 2 blocks from campus at a place called Forge Field. It was a custom metal fabrication shop, a huge, cavernous warehouse that smelled of ozone, hot steel, and motor oil. It was Theo's world, magnified. The owner, a man named Sal, looked at my thin arms and my art school jacket and laughed. "You're not afraid of fire, are you, college kid?" "No," I said. "I'm afraid of not finishing my work." He hired me for $10 an hour, sweeping up metal shavings. "You sweep for 2 months," he said. "You show up on time, then we talk about the torch." I swept, I organized, I learned the different grades of steel by the dust they left. And after exactly 2 months, Sal tossed a heavy welding mask at my feet. "Okay," he said. "Let's see if you can draw a straight line with fire." I learned to weld. I learned the high, electric blue hiss of the Tiggy torch, the bright, sputtering shower of the MIG. I learned to join 2 pieces of cold, hard steel, to make them one. I burned myself. I ruined pieces, and I fell in love. It was the opposite of my glasswork. Glass was cold, precise, a puzzle. Welding was hot, intuitive, a fusion. It was creation by force. I started making my own frames, thin, delicate rods of steel, welded into cubes and angles, like line drawings in space. Then I'd create the mosaic inside, the glass pieces suspended by wires, the gold seams catching the light. I called the new series Spines. They were pieces that had their own skeletons. My junior year, a small gallery in Riverton, a serious, white-walled place called the Annex, offered me a solo show. My first, the opening was terrifying. The gallery lights were hot, people were quiet. They drank cheap white wine from plastic cups and whispered. Lainey and Theo were there, standing in the back, beaming so brightly they looked like lighthouses. A woman in a sharp black coat approached me. She had been staring at Spine 3 for a long time. "I have a question," she said, her voice polite. "They're beautiful, but why the gold? Why draw so much attention to the cracks?" I took a breath. I looked at the piece. I looked at Lainey. I finally had the answer. "Because we're all taught to be ashamed of the breaks," I said, my voice carrying in the small, quiet room. "We're taught to fill them with gray paste and paint over them, to pretend they never happened. But the break is the event. It's the most important part of the story. The gold doesn't hide it. It proves the piece survived. It celebrates the fact that it was broken, and it is still here." I pointed to the bright gold seam. "That crack is where the light remembers how to get in." The woman was quiet for a moment. She nodded, slowly. "Thank you," she said. "That's a very good answer." I stayed late. After everyone had left, the gallery owner had given me a key to lock up. I was wiping down the small wine-stained counter. My heart still humming. I was an artist, in a gallery, with a key. I went to the front podium to gather the guest book. Underneath it was a piece of trash, a crumpled paper coffee cup sleeve. No, not a sleeve, a receipt. From the coffee shop on the corner, the timestamp was for 7:15 p.m., right in the middle of the opening. I turned it over. On the back, in a familiar, slightly messy scrawl, were 3 words, "Proud of you." My knees went weak. I sank onto the gallery's front bench. Noah. He had been here. He had driven here. He had walked into the gallery. He had looked at my work. He had seen permission and the spines. He had seen the gold cracks, and he hadn't stayed. He had come all this way, and he couldn't walk across the last 30 feet of the room to say hello. He had left a piece of trash, a ghost signature, and disappeared back into the life his father had chosen for him. I clutched the receipt. It was a profound connection and a bottomless, aching gap, all at once. He was proud, but he was gone. That night, I didn't go back to my dorm. I went to the studio at Pine Ridge, and I sketched for hours. The gallery show felt good, but it was for an audience of art buyers. Noah's visit. It meant something else. It meant the work wasn't just for me, or for the art world. It was a signal fire. I knew what I had to do. I went back to Ironbridge the next weekend. I sat Lainey and Theo down at their heavy kitchen table. "I want to start something," I said. "Here, in the studio," I laid out my plan. A workshop, not just a class, a free recurring program. I wanted to call it Shard Stories. "It's for the kids still in the system," I explained, my voice gaining speed. "The kids at the Dunbars, the kids at Maple Row, the ones who are waiting. I want to teach them what you taught me. How to grind the sharp edges, how to mix the resin, how to use the gold." Lainey was already nodding. Theo was already looking at a calendar. "We can't just teach them mosaics," I said. "We teach them that a break isn't the end of the story. We teach them how to tell their own story, with glass and gold, free, every Saturday." Lainey and Theo didn't just agree, they became my partners. Theo found the grant applications. Lainey built the curriculum. We applied for funding from a major county organization, the Stonebridge Trust. They were an old, established fund, and their primary requirement, repeated in every document, was absolute fiscal transparency. We got the grant. It was enough to fund the program for 2 years. I was 21 years old. I was a senior at Pine Ridge, the founder of a nonprofit, and a person with a legal, binding contract with the Stonebridge Trust. I remembered Alana Reyes's voice in the car. "You're going to have people who are going to ask you for things." I sat down at my laptop and I wrote the official bylaws for Shard Stories. I wasn't just an artist, I was an administrator. I was the protector of this new, fragile thing. I wrote sections on safety, on materials, on funding, and then I wrote the most important one, Article 4, Section 2, Conflict of Interest. To ensure the absolute transparency required by our funders and our mission, I typed, "No program funds, contracts, or partnerships may be entered into with any entity owned or operated by a direct relative of the program director. All transactions must be at arm's length to avoid any appearance of impropriety." It was a shield. It was Alana's "no," forged in legal language. I printed the page. As program director, I signed my name first. I was building a wall. I didn't know how soon I would need it. The mail, as always, brought the past. It was another envelope, not pink this time. It was thick, creamy, expensive cardstock. It was another wedding invitation. For my mother. She had a new last name, again. This was, by my count, husband number 3, or maybe 4. The invitation was for a lavish-looking event at a winery. Tucked inside the envelope was not a personal note. There was no, "I'd love for you to be there," Instead, there was a small, pre-printed card. It had a website address on it, a donation registry. It read, "In lieu of gifts, Elaine and Robert ask that you consider a cash donation to help support the launching of our new family." I stared at the card. Support the launching of our new family. She was fundraising, using her wedding to solicit cash, and she had sent this to me, not as a daughter, not even as a guest, as a donor. She had no idea what I did. She had no idea about my work, my gallery, my grant. She just saw a name on a list, a potential source of funds, a resource. I thought of the bylaw I had just signed. The shield was in place. I felt a cold, clear anger. It was the same clarity I felt when I centered a piece of steel under the torch. I took the wedding invitation, with its expensive, embossed script. I took the tacky, greedy little donation card, and I slid them both into the paper shredder. I did not respond. Instead, I turned back to my laptop. I opened the Shard Stories website. I created a new page. I uploaded the logo Lainey had designed, a fox with a golden kintsugi seam down its back. I wrote a heading announcing the first annual Shard Stories Scholarship Fund. I typed, "This fund is established to provide a graduating high school senior from the North River foster care system with funds for art supplies, books, and a future of their own making." My mother wanted to fund her new family. I would fund my family, the kids still in the shadow, the ones waiting for the light to get in. The next Saturday, I drove to Ironbridge for the first official Show Us workshop. The kids were already there, loud and nervous and excited. I walked to the glass front door of the studio. I took out a sign I had hand-painted. I taped it to the glass, facing the street. "Open to the public, pay what you can." My senior year at Pine Ridge was a blur of welding sparks, resin fumes, and grant paperwork. Shard Stories was no longer just a Saturday idea. It was a recognized entity. I was commuting back to Ironbridge every weekend, running the workshops, while also trying to finish my thesis. The work was paying off. The Stonebridge Trust grant gave us legitimacy. I used that legitimacy to approach the county. After 6 months of meticulous proposals and nervous presentations in sterile government boardrooms, I signed the Memorandum of Understanding. Shard Stories was officially partnering with Iron County. We were going to bring our workshops, our glass, and our gold resin into 4 different public high schools. It was a huge victory. The Harbor Falls Ledger thought so. 2. They had run the small photo of my work 2 years ago. This time, they sent a photographer to the studio. The article that came out was different. It wasn't in the art section. It was on the front page. It was a portrait. Me, in my welding mask, pushed up on my head, my heavy canvas apron covered in grout dust. I was smiling. The headline was, "From Foster Care to Founder Alina Price Builds a New Story." And there it was, in bold black ink, Alina Price, not a former youth, not a local artist, my name, my full, correct, legal name, attached to my title. Founder. I bought 10 copies. Lainey and Theo framed one and hung it in the Ironbridge studio, right next to the "Pay What You Can" sign. The article was a signal. It was a bright, flashing light, and it didn't just attract the county, it attracted the ghosts. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the Ironbridge studio, inventorying a shipment of safety goggles for the new school program. The front bell chimed. I looked up, expecting a student or a delivery driver. It was my mother. I hadn't seen her face, not in person, in 8 years. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair a brassy blonde I didn't recognize. She was wearing a thin jacket, and she looked cold. Even inside, she was holding a stack of folded papers in one hand, her knuckles white. "Alina," she said. Her voice was strained. "Hello, Elaine," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used for county administrators. I put my clipboard down. This is nice," she said, looking around the studio. Her eyes skimmed over the mosaics on the wall, the gold seams, the foxes that don't run. She didn't understand them. They were just things. "You're doing well." "I am," I said. What can I do for you? She stepped forward, her confidence faltering. The rehearsed speech she'd planned was failing her. She just shoved the papers at me. I need help. I didn't take them. Help with what? It's bills, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Medical, my new husband, Robert, he got hurt at work, and the insurance, it's a mess. They're going to come after the house. She unfolded the top paper. It was a hospital bill. The amount circled in red ink. It was a staggering number. I need you to co-sign a loan, she said, the words coming out in a rush. Just a small one. To consolidate this, the bank just needs a stable guarantor. It's just a signature. Alina, for your mother. Your mother. The words hung in the air. A price tag. I looked at her. The woman who had sent me a donation request for her wedding. The woman who had signed a paper to give me away. I thought of Alana Reyes's card. If you ever need someone to say no for you, I realized I didn't. Please sit down, Elaine, I said. I pointed to the stool by the front desk. She sat, looking wrong and out of place against the backdrop of my work. I went to the water cooler and got her a small paper cup of water. She took it, her hand shaking slightly. I did not sit down. I stood across the counter from her. I was the proprietor. She was a visitor. I am not going to co-sign a loan, I said. My voice was quiet, flat, and final. Her face crumpled. Alina, please, I'm your mother. You wouldn't even have all this place, if it wasn't for me. I gave you life. You did, I said, and then you signed it away. I am not financially responsible for you. Signing that paper would put this entire organization at risk. It would put the grants at risk. It would put the kids I serve at risk. I will not do that. But what am I supposed to do? She whispered, the anger replaced by a desperate, childish panic. You're in a medical debt crisis, I said, switching to my administrator voice. This isn't a family problem. It's a systems problem. What you need is a professional. If you give me the hospital file number and your contact information, I will pass your case to a medical social worker I know at the county hospital. They specialize in negotiating these bills. They can help you set up a payment plan or apply for relief. She stared at me, bewildered. I was offering her a solution, a real one. But it wasn't the solution she wanted. She wanted my money. She wanted my name, the name I had given value. She wrote down the number, her handwriting spiky and angry. I took the piece of paper. I'll make the call this afternoon, I said. They will contact you. She stood up, leaving the cup of water untouched. You've changed, she said, her voice turning cold and hard. You've become cold. I've become a professional, I said. I hope the social worker can help you. Elaine. She left. The bell chimed, and she was gone. I took her paper cup and dropped it in the recycling bin. I thought that was it. I thought the wall had held. I was wrong. That was just the first probe. The second came 2 weeks later. I was welding in the studio at Pine Ridge when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had a Harbor Falls area code. Alina Price. Alina Kiddo. It's your dad. His voice was a boom of false cheer. The same voice I'd heard on the phone call about his new family. Dad. Hi. I'm in the middle of working. This'll just take a second. Listen, I saw that article about you in the paper. The county wow. You're really doing it, kid. A real businesswoman. I'm busy. Dad, what do you need? Right to the point. I love it. He laughed. Okay, so, you know I'm in woodworking. My new wife, Sarah, she's got a great eye for design. We're starting a little business. High-end, custom-built furniture, and I saw you're working with the schools now. I could feel the shape of it coming. My hand tightened on the cold welding torch. So, here's the pitch, he said. We partner up. My company, your nonprofit. We can provide all the wood supplies for your workshops, tables, frames, you name it. We build a curriculum around it. We just We just need a little seed money to scale up production. The grant money you have. It would just flow through you, to us. It's a partnership. Everybody wins. We'll be a real family business. A family business. I slowly, deliberately, put the torch down on the fireproof table. I pulled off my heavy leather gloves. Dad, I said, did you read the article? Of course I did. That's why I'm calling. Proud of you, kiddo. Then you know Shard Stories is a non-profit, funded by the Stonebridge Trust and Iron County. Yeah, that's the one. Which means, I continued, my voice as cold as the steel on my table, that we are bound by state and federal laws regarding conflict of interest. Conflict of what? I am the director of the nonprofit. You are my biological father. I am legally and ethically barred from entering into any financial partnership with you or any company you own. It's in our bylaws. Article 4, Section 2. There was a dead, flat silence on the other end of the line. He finally broke it with a short, awkward laugh. Bylaws, Alina. Come on. This is me. This is your dad. What? You're going to quote bylaws at me. Don't you trust me? This has nothing to do with trust, Dad, I said. This has to do with the law. The answer is no. I cannot, and I will not. Flo, grant money to you. But, Alina, it's a good idea. It would help me. I'm sure it would. The answer is still no. I have to go. Don't you? I hung up. The attacks were coordinated. They were desperate, and they weren't done. A week later, Lainey forwarded me an email. The subject line was, "Please help Alina." It was a link to a GoFundMe campaign. I clicked it. My own face stared back at me. It was the photo from the Ledger article. The headline, in big bold letters, read, "Save Alina's studio from bankruptcy." My blood went cold. The text was a masterpiece of fabricated drama. It was written by Robert Connolly, my mother's new husband. Our daughter, Alina Price, it began, is a courageous artist who has overcome a tragic childhood. She has poured her heart and soul into a community art studio, but she is in desperate trouble. Predatory county contracts and massive overhead have pushed her to the brink of bankruptcy. She is too proud to ask for help. So we, her family, are asking for her. Please help us save this vital community resource before she loses everything. It was a lie, a toxic, dangerous, public lie. They were using my name, my story, and my photo to commit fraud. They weren't just asking for money. They were trying to destroy my reputation with the very partners I had just secured. I didn't call Alana. I called Mara Keegan. She was a lawyer in Riverton who did pro bono work for artists. She had reviewed my county contract for me. I sent her the link. 5 minutes later, she called me. "Alina," she said, and her voice was not calm. It was the voice of a shark that smells blood. "This is libel. This is fraudulent misrepresentation. This is copyright infringement for using the Ledger's photo. They are so stupid. What do we do?" "You do nothing," she said. "I do everything." Within 1 hour, Mara had sent a cease and desist letter to Robert Connolly's email address, citing 3 different federal statutes. Within 2 hours, she had filed a formal fraud and copyright report with the GoFundMe legal department, attaching the cease and desist and a copy of my grant agreement with Iron County as proof of solvency. It took the platform less than 24 hours. The page was shut down. The money, what little had been raised, was frozen and returned to the donors. It was gone. My phone rang that night. It was Noah. "Al," he said, and he sounded exhausted. I just got off the phone with Dad. He told me about the other thing, the GoFundMe. Alina, I didn't know. I swear, I had nothing to do with it." "I know you didn't, Noah," I said. I was sitting on the floor of my dorm, my head against the cold cinder block. "It's Mom's new husband. He's a piece of work. I'm going to talk to her. I'm going to tell her." "Noah, don't." I cut him off. Thank you for calling. I appreciate it, but I'm handling it. It's already handled. What how? It's business, Noah. It's been dealt with. Please, just stay out of it. It's safer for you. Okay, Al, he said, his voice small. Okay, just be careful. He hung up. I had protected him. I had kept the boundary, but the damage was done. The internet is forever. The county administrator, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Diaz, called me the next morning. Alina, she said, her voice sharp and official. We have a problem. My office has received 3 separate inquiries regarding a bankrupt program we are funding. I see the pages down, but the story is out. This is a public relations nightmare for the county. Ms. Diaz, I said. It was a fraudulent campaign started by a disgruntled relative. It has been handled. I don't care if it was handled, she snapped. I care about compliance. I need a full review of your organization's financials, your bylaws, and your grant spending reports for the last 6 months. I need it in 48 hours, or we are freezing the school contract. The line clicked. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop. I opened my files. I had every receipt. I had every bylaw. I had every signature. I had my shield. I worked for 36 hours straight. I created a full professional dossier. I included the grant reports, the bank statements showing a healthy balance, the bylaws I had written with Article 4, Section 2 highlighted in yellow, and, at the very end, a copy of Mara's cease and desist letter and the confirmation from GoFundMe that the campaign was fraudulent. I was transparent. I gave them everything. I emailed the PDF, all 112 pages of it, to Ms. Diaz's office with 6 hours to spare. I slept for a day. When I woke up, there was an email from her. It contained 3 words. Compliance confirmed. Proceed. I had won. I had held the wall. I was sitting in the Iron Bridge studio that evening, just looking at the light fade, when my phone buzzed. A text message. From Elaine. You owe me this. You owe me. I looked at the message. I looked at the cold, dark screen. Then I looked up, on my workbench. Under the single desk lamp was the small, framed piece of gray clay, the back half of the original fox, its broken edge sealed in a perfect, shining line of gold. I looked at the message again. I owe nothing, I whispered to the empty, quiet room. The dust from the GoFundMe incident had barely settled, but it had an immediate, positive side effect. When the Stonebridge Trust, our primary funder, came in for their midterm review, they weren't just looking at our programming, they were conducting a stress test. Their lead advisor, a quiet, sharp man named Mr. Harrison, sat at the head of the conference table in the Iron Bridge studio. He had the full compliance package I had sent to the county, and he was reading my bylaws, not scanning them. He finished Article 4, Section 2, and looked up, his expression unreadable. Ms. Price, he said, his voice dry. I've been advising nonprofits for 2 decades. I've reviewed hundreds of bylaws for young organizations. This, he said, tapping the conflict of interest clause, is one of the most airtight I've ever seen. It's rare, this level of foresight. I just nodded. I had good legal advice. You had good instincts, he replied. Your funding is secure. Proceed. The shield was strong. The county had endorsed me. The trust had endorsed me. My legal and financial armor was fully in place, and that's when my parents stopped asking for favors and started making demands. They realized they couldn't get in through the front door, so they decided to burn the house down. Elaine's demand came first, delivered by certified mail. It was a single, terrifying page. She wasn't just asking for a signature anymore. She was demanding it. A predatory lending company had apparently advised her. The letter stated that if I, as her only financially solvent child, did not agree to place the Iron Bridge studio, the studio itself, the nonprofit's asset as collateral on a mortgage to secure her escalating medical and personal debts, she would be forced into a catastrophic bankruptcy. The letter included a deadline, 72 hours, My father's move was in person. He didn't come to the studio. He cornered me at Forge Field, the metal shop near Pine Bridge. While I was welding the frame for my senior thesis, he was smiling, that same warm, sawdust and sunshine smile. "Alina, kiddo," he said, holding up a thick bound document. I know. Bylaws. You had to say no on the phone. I get it. I respect it." He held out the document. "This is from my lawyer. It's not a partnership. It's a preferred vendor agreement. It just cleans everything up." I powered down the TIG torch, the blue flame hissing out. I lifted my mask. "Dad, I already told you." "Just look," he said, flipping to the last page. It was already signed by him. "It's simple. You sign, and we're in business." Then he tapped the top of the first page. "And my guy was smart. He backdated it to before your county contract was finalized. So it looks like we were always your partner. It clears up all that legal nonsense. It's just paperwork, a formality." My blood ran cold. It wasn't a formality. It was fraud. "I'll have my lawyer look at it," I said, my voice flat. His smile flickered. "A lawyer, Al. It's just me. Your dad." "I'll have my lawyer look at it," I repeated. Taking the document, I scanned it and emailed it to Mara Keegan. Her phone call came in 20 minutes. Her voice was not calm. "Alina, where did you get this?" "My father gave it to me." "Do not sign it," she said, her voice like ice. "It is a predatory trap. It's not a vendor agreement. That clause on page 3, it's a 3-year, exclusive binding clause. It would make his new company the sole and exclusive materials and logistics provider for all Shard Stories programming. He wouldn't just be a partner. He would own your supply chain. He'd get every dollar of your grant money. And you couldn't legally buy a box of screws from anyone else for 3 years. The backdating is a felony. If you sign this, you don't just lose your funding, you go to jail." I sat down on a steel barrel. It was a chess move, a coordinated pincer attack. I called an emergency meeting of the Shard Stories Board. I booked the small conference room at the Harbor Falls Library. I set my digital recorder on the table. "This meeting is being recorded for the official minutes. Thursday, May 10th. The board was all there. Laney, Theo, Mr. Harrison from the trust, and Ms. Diaz from the county, who had taken a permanent seat after the GoFundMe incident. I have 2 items on the agenda," I said, my voice clear and administrative. "Both are formal demands from my biological parents, which fall under Article 4, Section 2. I read Elaine's 72-hour demand aloud. The threat, the mortgage. Then, I passed around copies of my father's backdated contract, and I read Mara's legal analysis aloud. The room was silent. Ms. Diaz looked like she was going to burst a blood vessel. Theo just stared at the contract. His hands clenched so tight, his knuckles were white. "As program director," I concluded, "I am formally bringing both proposals before the board for a vote, as required by our bylaws." Ms. Diaz made the motion. "I move to emphatically reject both proposals. In perpetuity, I further move that the board authorize our legal counsel, Mara Keegan, to issue a formal cease and desist response to both parties, informing them that any further contact of this nature will be considered harassment of a county-funded nonprofit." Theo seconded. Aye. The vote was unanimous, 7-0. It was on the record. It was done. The organization, my shield, had spoken. They didn't take the legal no as an answer. They took it as a signal to abandon strategy and resort to brute force. Elaine came to the studio the next day. The 72 hours were almost up, and she brought Emmy. I hadn't seen my sister in person in 8 years. She was 17, a senior in high school. She was pale, thin, and looked exactly like my mother. She looked terrified. "Alina, please." Elaine started crying the moment I opened the door. She physically pushed Emmy forward, into the studio. "Look at her. This is your sister. She doesn't deserve this. I'm going to lose the house. We'll be homeless. Are you going to do that? To Emmy. To your family." my heart, which had been so cold and clear, fractured. Not for Elaine. For Emmy. For this ghost who had been stolen from me, now being used as a weapon. I looked at Emmy. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Elaine," I said, my voice hardening. "The board has legally rejected your request. I am not mortgaging this studio." "You cold-hearted," Elaine hissed, her tears vanishing, replaced by pure venom. "But," I cut her off. I had prepared for this. I went to my desk. I pulled out a file. "I am willing to help, as a private citizen, not as a guarantor." I pushed a folder toward her. "This is the direct contact for the nonprofit medical debt relief fund I spoke about. They are waiting for your call. They have agreed to review your case." Then I pulled out a single cashier's check. "And this is a one-time personal payment. It's made out directly to the hospital, not to you. It's for a small fraction of the bill. It is all I am willing, or able, to give. This is not a negotiation. It is the only offer. Take it, and use the relief fund, or leave." Elaine stared at the check. Her face contorted with rage. It wasn't the blank check she wanted. It was a solution, which she didn't want. She wanted a rescue. She snatched the check and the folder. "Come on, Emmy, we're leaving," she stormed out. Emmy lingered for 1/2 second. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a complicated, frantic apology. She mouthed one word, "Thanks." Then my mother grabbed her arm and pulled her out the door. My father's move was, as always, more public. My senior thesis show, my largest exhibition, was opening at Foundry Hall, the most prestigious gallery in Riverton. It was the biggest night of my professional life, the night before the opening. I was at the gallery, adjusting the lights on my Spines series. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "I'm at the cafe across the street. Noah is with me. Come talk." He had Noah, the last weapon. My stomach felt like it was full of wet cement. I walked out of the gallery and crossed the street. The cafe was bright, warm. I saw them in a back booth, my father, with his familiar smile, a stack of his fraudulent contracts on the table. And Noah, now 22, looking miserable. "Alina, kiddo." "Glad you could make it," my father boomed, like he was hosting a party. "Noah was just saying how much he misses us all being a family, and that's what this is about. Family." He slid the contract across the table. "You sign this? It helps me. It helps you. It helps Noah. We all win. A real family business." I didn't look at the contract. I looked at my brother. He was staring at a salt shaker, tracing its outline with his finger. "Noah," I said. He flinched. He looked up, his eyes pained. "Dad," Noah said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "Stop it." My father's smile didn't waver. "What I'm trying to help us, son. I'm bringing the family back together." "No, you're not," Noah said, his voice gaining a desperate edge. He finally looked at his father. "You're pushing her. You've always pushed her. You and Mom. You just pushed her away. Now stop. Just stop." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Don't. Don't let him make you. Al, just don't." My father's face darkened. The salesman was gone. I put my hands flat on the table. "The board has legally rejected your proposal. Dad, Mara Keegan has already sent the cease and desist. The legal answer is no." I looked at Noah. "Thank you for coming," I said. I turned and walked out of the cafe. My father's stunned, furious silence at my back. I thought I was done. I thought I had won the chess game. But that night, hours before the biggest opening of my life, the final email arrived. It was from Elaine. "If you do not reverse this decision by morning, I am going to the Harbor Falls Ledger. I am going to tell them the real story. The one about the ungrateful, adopted daughter who got rich off a county grant and left her own mother and sister homeless. We'll see how your precious donors like that story. The final threat, to destroy my reputation, to poison the well." I sat in my apartment, the lights off. She was going to tell her story. I looked at the speech I had written for the opening. It was a polite, boring speech. It thanked my professors. It thanked the gallery. I highlighted the entire text and pressed delete. I opened a new blank document. I put my fingers on the keys, and I started to write my own story. The next night, Foundry Hall was packed. The lights were warm. My Spines series, the steel frames and the gold-seamed glass, looked like they were floating in the air. I walked to the podium. I saw Lainey and Theo, their faces shining with pride. I saw Professor Andel and Mr. Harrison from the Trust. And in the back, standing by the exit, I saw Alana Reyes. I had sent her a private invitation. She had come. I looked at my new notes. "Good evening," I said. My voice was clear. It didn't shake. It filled the entire hall. "My name is Alina Price. I grew up with case files, not photo albums. For years, I was taught that my history was a liability, something to be hidden, that the breaks in my story were shameful." I gestured to the massive pieces hanging around us. "My art says something different. It says the break is the most important part, and I am not ashamed of my story. I am not ashamed of the system that I survived." I looked to the back of the room. There are people from that system who saved me, people who showed up with clipboards and ended up giving me a future. Alana Reyes, my former caseworker, is here tonight. Alana, thank you. Alana looked stunned. She raised a hand, a small, shocked wave. It is in the spirit of Alana's work, the work of fixing a broken system from the inside, that Shard Stories is announcing a new scholarship tonight. I felt Lainey grab Theo's hand. This scholarship is specifically for children who are currently in the system and have been separated from their siblings, to provide them with funds for travel, for connection, for art supplies, to help them hold on to the threads. I took a deep breath. I owned the narrative. I owned all of it. Tonight, we are launching the Emmy Noah Scholarship Fund. I didn't give my parents money. I didn't give them my studio. I took the last things they had, the names of the children they had separated, and I turned them into a different kind of currency. I took their final threat, and I turned it into a foundation. The applause from the speech was still ringing in my ears. I felt light, as if I had finally set down a heavy, awkward load I had been carrying for 8 years. Lainey and Theo hugged me, their faces wet with tears. Professor Andal shook my hand, her grip like steel. "That, Ms. Price," she said, "was a thesis defense." As the crowd began to move, to look closer at the art, a gallery assistant I didn't recognize touched my arm. "Ms. Price, there are some people here to see you. They said it was a private family matter." I put them in the small conference room down the hall. The warmth of the gallery vanished. I felt an arctic chill slide down my spine. Family, of course. They hadn't come for the speech. They had come for the signature. I looked at Lainey. "It's them." Theo's face hardened. "I'll go." "No," I said. I straightened the cuff of my jacket. "This is my meeting. This is my no. I have to deliver it myself." I left the warm, buzzing gallery, the sound of people discussing my art fading behind me. I walked down a long, sterile white hallway, my heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. The conference room was at the end, its door slightly ajar. Spilling a cold, fluorescent light, I pushed it open. They were all there. It was a tableau of my past. My mother, Elaine, sat clutching her purse. My father, Victor, sat opposite her, trying to look casual, leaning back in his chair, and they had brought their team. Next to my mother was a man in a rumpled gray suit with a briefcase open on the table, the debt broker. Next to my father was the business partner from his failed contract attempt. They had assembled for a final, coordinated assault. There was no audience here. There were no cameras, just me, them, and a long, polished table. "Alina," my father started, his salesman's smile firmly in place. That was quite a performance out there, very theatrical, announcing a scholarship. "With your brother's name, very touching." "We're glad you're finally thinking about family," Elaine chimed in, her voice sharp. Because that's what this is about. The debt broker pushed a stack of papers into the center of the table. A pen was placed neatly on top. The 72-hour deadline has passed. Ms. Price, he said, his voice flat. This is the final offer from my client. You sign as guarantor, and your mother's case is resolved. And my father added, sliding his own backdated contract next to it. You sign the vendor agreement, a formality. We all walk out of here tonight as a family, as partners. Just sign. Alina. I stood at the end of the table. I didn't move to sit down. I looked at the papers. I looked at their 4 expectant, predatory faces. I slowly, deliberately, unzipped my bag. I reached inside. I have a counteroffer, I said. I took out the small, deep-set black frame. I walked to the table and I placed it, with a solid, definitive thud, directly on top of their contracts. The 4 of them stared at it. It was the original piece of gray clay, the back half of the fox I had nattered on the floor of our house. Its single, broken edge was now a brilliant, unmissable, shining line of gold. This is my answer, I said, my voice quiet, but it filled the room. This is the piece I saved from the courtroom, the day you both left me for the state to handle. This is the part of me you threw away, and I kept it. I sealed the break myself. This is my permanent reminder of why I will never sign anything for either of you. Their faces changed. This was not in their script. You came here with demands, I continued. I reached back into my bag and pulled out a thick, professional folder. I came here with solutions. I tossed the folder onto the table next to the fox. In here, you will find several documents. First, the notarized, board-approved, and legally binding rejection of both of your proposals. It is final. I tapped the folder. Second, you will find the final cashier's check I gave to Elaine, made out to the hospital, which she cashed. That is the end of my personal financial contribution. And third, you will find a full, comprehensive list of resources, the Medical Debt Relief Fund, the number for a nonprofit credit counseling service, the contact for 3 different, reputable bankruptcy attorneys. That is the real help. That is the help you can get. It is not my signature. My father's face went crimson. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. This is just art. You're throwing your family into the street over a piece of trash, over some metaphor. He leaned across the table. Are you really going to let your family just drift away? You'll just let us fail. I looked him right in the eye. The old fear was gone. You are not my family, I said, my voice cold and clear. You are my biological parents. My family is in that gallery. My family is Lainey and Theo, who made me tea and gave me a key. A family does not throw their 14-year-old child into the water to see if she can swim. A family does not divide their children like furniture and leave one behind. You did that. We are not a family. We are a closed case file. Elaine let out a sound, half sob, half hiss. How dare you? How can you be so ungrateful? I knew you were strong. That's why I did it. She tried the one last pathetic tactic, the martyr. I chose Emmy that day because she was weaker. She was fragile. I knew you. You were tough. You were the strong one. I knew you would survive. I almost laughed. It was so pathetic, so transparent. No, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke the truth. That is the story you tell yourself so you can sleep. You didn't leave me because I was strong. You left me because I was quiet. You chose Emmy because she was the easy one. And you left me because you knew I was the one who wouldn't be asked her opinion. You left me because I was the problem you didn't want to solve. I was the leftover. And I'm done being your leftover. The room was silent. The debt broker and the partner looked at each other. This was not a business negotiation. This was an exorcism. The broker finally cleared his throat. Mr. Price? Mrs. Connolly, perhaps you need 5 minutes alone with your daughter to— No, I said, cutting him off. I looked at the 4 of them. This meeting is over. All of you need to leave. Now. I walked to the conference room door and I opened it wide. Holding it, they were stunned. I had just taken control of the room, the house, the narrative. "What?" my father sputtered. "Get out," I said. "This is not my studio. This is not my home. This is a gallery where I am an invited artist, and you are trespassing. Leave." The two men, the broker and the partner, stood up immediately. They were businessmen. They knew a lost cause. They snapped their briefcases shut, gathered their useless, unsigned papers, and filed out of the room, not making eye contact. I closed the door on them, leaving me alone. With Victor and Elaine, they were still sitting at the table. Two small, aging, pathetic figures, defeated. I didn't leave the door. I just stood there. The door opened again, pushing me gently. It was Noah. He looked wrecked, his eyes red. He had clearly been outside, listening. He walked past me, into the room. He didn't look at our parents. He walked right past their table and came to stand next to me. He was taller than me now. He put his hand on my shoulder. He looked at me, and his voice was rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "I heard. You're not signing, and I support you." That was it. The final, emotional checkmate. The brother he had taken, the one he had tried to use as a bargaining chip, had just walked across the board and stood next to me. My father put his head in his hands. Elaine just stared, her mouth open. I stood up straight. Noah's hand a warm, solid weight on my shoulder. I looked at the two people who had started this. "This is the last time," I said. "This is the final word. No. No to your manipulation. No to your games. No to your debt being signed in my name. And no, you do not get to use my story, my memories, or my name as your leverage ever again. They are mine. They are not yours to trade." I opened the door again, all the way. "Now get out of my show." They finally stood. They were old. They were out of moves. They walked past me, defeated. As Elaine passed, her face a mask of gray, venomous rage, I held out the single folder of real resources. "If you actually want help," I said, "start here, and start by stopping. Stop using my name. Stop using Emmy's name. And stop using Noah's name. We are not your assets. We are done." She didn't take the folder. She just walked away. My father followed, not looking back. I let the folder drop to the floor. I left it there, with the rest of the trash. Noah and I stood in the hallway for a long time. He just squeezed my shoulder. "Go back to your party, Al," he whispered. "Go on." I nodded. I left him in the cold, white hallway, and I walked back. I walked back into the warmth. I walked back into the light. The gallery was still full, the sound of laughter and conversation washing over me. Lainey and Theo saw me. They didn't ask. They just opened their arms, and I walked into their embrace. After a moment, I pulled away, and I walked to the center of the room. I stood in front of my thesis piece, the largest one I had ever made. It was a huge mosaic, 6 feet tall. It was an abstract shape, a cyclone of deep blues, sharp grays, and broken mirror. And running through it, holding it all together, were massive, brilliant veins of gold resin. The cracks ran straight, and then they branched off, creating new patterns, new life. But they all did one important thing. They stopped, perfectly, at the edge of the steel frame. They didn't bleed out. They didn't escape. They were contained. I had titled it, "No, and Still Loving." I reached out and touched the smooth, solid gold line. The break was healed, the story was finished, and it was mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.